I pushed open my son's bedroom door, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the handle, and that's when I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound coming from underneath the bed frame, like fabric dragging against hardwood floor, and my entire body went cold because Marcus lived alone. He'd been alone for 3 years since the divorce, and he wasn't answering his phone for 2 solid weeks, and now I was standing in his dark bedroom at 3 in the afternoon with the curtains drawn and the air thick with a smell I couldn't quite place. Something medicinal mixed with fear. I took 1 step closer to the bed, my worn sneakers making no sound on the floor, and I called out, "Marcus, baby, are you here?" But my voice came out as barely a whisper, and the shuffling stopped immediately, completely. Like whatever was under there was holding its breath, waiting, and I realized with horror that I was holding my breath too. My lungs burning, my heart hammering so hard against my ribs, I thought I might collapse right there. The silence stretched out for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 seconds, and then I heard it again, quieter this time, a slight movement, and I saw the edge of the dust ruffle move just a fraction of an inch, and I knew with absolute certainty that someone was hiding under my son's bed. Someone alive. Someone terrified. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was Marcus in trouble? Was this a break-in? Was someone hurt, and I couldn't make my legs move forward or backward? I was frozen in that doorway with my hand still on the knob and sweat running down my back despite the coldness of the house. And then I heard the smallest sound, a sound that changed everything. A soft whimper, high-pitched, young, definitely not my 42-year-old son, and it was the sound of a child or a young person in pain. If you're watching this video right now, I need you to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you is something that shattered my entire world. Everything I thought I knew about my son, about my family, about the choices I made 28 years ago that I thought were buried forever. And I need to know how far this story reaches. I need to know I'm not alone in this. I bent down slowly, my knees cracking with the effort. And I lifted the edge of the dust ruffle with one shaking finger. And in the darkness under that bed, I saw a pair of eyes staring back at me. Young eyes. Girls' eyes, maybe 15 or 16 years old, and they were filled with such fear and pain and something else. Something that looked like recognition, like she knew who I was, even though I had never seen her before in my life. And in that split second, before she opened her mouth to speak, I somehow knew. I knew in my bones and in my blood and in the deepest part of my mother's heart exactly who this girl was and why she was hiding under my son's bed. And the knowledge hit me like a physical blow, making me sit back hard on the floor, because this girl had my son's eyes. She had my mother's chin. She had the same widow's peak that ran through 4 generations of my family. And I heard myself say in a voice I didn't recognize, "Oh my God, you're Lily." My name is Patricia Hernandez. I'm 64 years old, and I live in a small apartment in Mesa, Arizona, about 40 minutes from where my son Marcus has a house in Tempe. And until 2 weeks ago, I thought I knew everything about my son's life. I thought the secrets we buried 28 years ago would stay buried forever. Marcus is my only child, my miracle baby, born when I was 22 and working 2 jobs to get by after his father left us when Marcus was just 6 months old. I raised him alone, poured everything I had into making sure he had opportunities I never did, worked myself to exhaustion so he could go to college, could make something of himself, and he did. He became a pharmaceutical sales representative, made good money, married a lovely woman named Caroline, and I thought he was happy. I thought we'd put the past behind us. But I need to go back to when Marcus was 17 years old and still in high school, because that's where this story really begins. That's where the seeds of this nightmare were planted. Marcus had a girlfriend that year, a sweet girl named Amanda Reeves. She was 16, quiet, artistic, came from a troubled home with a mother who drank and a father who'd been in and out of prison. And I didn't approve. I'm ashamed to say it now, but I didn't think she was good enough for my boy. I thought she would drag him down, keep him from his potential. They dated for 8 months, and Marcus was head over heels in love, the way only a 17-year-old boy can be, writing her poetry, spending every spare moment with her, talking about their future together, and I watched with growing alarm because I could see my dreams for him slipping away. Then Amanda got pregnant, came to our apartment one evening in March with tears running down her face, and told us she was 12 weeks along. And I felt my entire world tilt on its axis. Felt everything I'd worked for crumbling, because a baby meant Marcus wouldn't go to college, wouldn't escape the poverty I'd fought so hard to lift us out of, would end up just like me, struggling and alone, and I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. I sat them both down at our kitchen table, that old Formica table with the crack down the middle, and I talked to them for 3 hours straight. Talked until my voice was hoarse, painted pictures of their future with a baby. No education, no opportunities, trapped in dead-end jobs, unable to give the child anything, and I watched Marcus's face change as he listened. Watched the fear creep in, and I pressed harder. I'm so ashamed of this now, but I pressed and pressed, until finally he agreed. They would put the baby up for adoption. It was the only responsible choice, the only way everyone could have a chance at a better life. Amanda didn't want to. She cried and begged, said she would raise the baby herself, her mother would help, but I was relentless. I convinced Marcus to convince her, and finally, 8 months pregnant and exhausted, she signed the papers, and in September of 1996, she gave birth to a baby girl at St. Joseph's Hospital, and they took that baby away before Amanda could even hold her. And I told myself it was for the best, it was the right thing. That baby would have a good family, 2 parents, stability, everything we couldn't give her. Marcus went to college that fall like I'd planned, got his degree, moved on with his life, and Amanda disappeared, moved away, and we never spoke of it again. Never. It became the thing we didn't talk about. The ghost that lived in the silence between us. Years passed. Marcus got married to Caroline when he was 32, a woman from a good family, a dental hygienist with her own career. And they tried to have children but couldn't. Something about Caroline's endometriosis. And after 3 years of fertility treatments that didn't work, they stopped trying, and Caroline became bitter about it. I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at other people's children. A hardness that hadn't been there before. They divorced 2 years ago, and Marcus told me it was mutual. They'd grown apart. Wanted different things, and he moved into his house in Tempe alone. And I visited him once a month, had Sunday dinners, talked about his work, and my garden, and everything. Except the things that really mattered. And I thought he was fine. I thought we were fine. I had no idea that the past had come back. That Amanda's daughter, our daughter Lily, had found him. And that everything was about to explode. Standing there on the floor of Marcus's bedroom, staring at this girl under the bed who had my family's face. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of 28 years of guilt crushing down on my chest. "How do you know my name?" the girl whispered, and her voice was weak, raspy, like she'd been crying or screaming or both, and I could see now that she was pale. So pale her skin looked almost translucent. With dark circles under her eyes and lips that had a slight blue tinge, and alarm bells started ringing in my head because I'd been a nurse's aide for 15 years. I knew what severe illness looked like, and this girl was sick, very sick. "I'm Marcus's mother," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to scare her more than she already was. "I'm Patricia, and I need you to come out from under there so I can help you, sweetheart. Can you do that for me?" She stared at me for a long moment, those eyes so much like Marcus's eyes searching my face. And then she nodded slightly and started to inch forward, and I could see it was taking enormous effort, her arms shaking as she pulled herself along the floor, and I reached under to help her, grasped her thin wrist, and felt my heart break because she was burning up. Her skin hot and dry with fever. It took us almost 5 minutes to get her out from under that bed and sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, and I could see she was wearing one of Marcus's old college sweatshirts that hung on her like a tent, and sweatpants that were rolled up at the ankles, and her feet were bare and dirty, and she was clutching a water bottle in one hand like it was a lifeline. "Where's Marcus?" I asked, looking around the room as if he might materialize from the shadows. "Where's my son, Lily?" She closed her eyes, tears leaking out from under her lids, and whispered, "He went to the pharmacy to get my medicine 3 days ago, and he never came back, and I've been here alone, and I'm so scared, and I'm so sick, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave because Caroline might see me. She can't know I'm here. He made me promise Caroline can never know. My blood ran cold at the mention of Caroline's name, Marcus's ex-wife, who was supposed to be out of his life, out of our lives. And I said, "What does Caroline have to do with this, honey? She and Marcus are divorced. They've been divorced for 2 years." Lily opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression that was far too old for her young face, an expression of someone who'd seen things they shouldn't have seen, known things they shouldn't have known. And she said in a flat voice, "They're not really divorced. It was just on paper, for the insurance. They still live together sometimes, and she knows about me now. I heard them fighting about it last week. I heard her say I was going to ruin everything, that I was just like my trash mother who tried to trap Marcus 28 years ago." The words hit me like slaps, each one stinging, because I recognized my own words from all those years ago. The things I'd said about Amanda, and I felt sick, physically sick, that my son had absorbed my poison and passed it on, or worse, that Caroline had somehow learned about the past and was using it, weaponizing it. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed Marcus's number for what must have been the 100th time in 2 weeks, and it went straight to voicemail, just like all the other times. And fear started to replace the shock, because where was my son? Why had he been gone for 3 days? Why wasn't he answering? And I looked at this sick girl sitting on his bedroom floor, and I thought about all the ways this could go wrong. All the terrible possibilities. "Lily," I said, kneeling down so we were eye level. "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning, how you found Marcus, why you're here, what's wrong with you health-wise, all of it. Can you do that?" She nodded and took a sip of water, her hands trembling so badly she spilled some on the sweatshirt, and then she started talking, her voice getting stronger as she went. And what she told me made my blood run cold, and my heart break, and my hands clench into fists. Because my son, my beautiful boy, who I'd raised to be good and kind, had gotten tangled up in something dark, and I didn't know if he was a victim, or a perpetrator, or both. Lily told me she'd grown up in foster care, that Amanda had died of an overdose when Lily was 7 years old, that she'd bounced between 6 different homes before aging out of the system at 18, and that she'd spent the last 2 years working at a coffee shop and going to community college and searching for her biological parents, using every free ancestry website and DNA database she could find. She found Marcus 4 months ago, in February, got a match through one of those genetic testing sites, and she sent him a message through the platform, and to her shock, he responded within hours, said he'd thought about her every day since she was born, that he'd wanted to find her but didn't know how, that he was so sorry for giving her up, and they started talking, messaging back and forth, then phone calls, then finally he invited her to come visit him in Tempe, said he wanted to meet her, wanted to get to know her, wanted to be part of her life if she'd let him. She came to Arizona in March, took a bus from Sacramento where she'd been living, and Marcus picked her up at the station, and she said he cried when he saw her, just stood there in the parking lot with tears running down his face, and she cried too, and they held each other, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she had family, like someone wanted her. He took her to his house, and they talked for hours, looking at photo albums, filling in the gaps of their lives, and Marcus told her about me, about how I'd raised him alone, about how hard I'd worked, and Lily said she wanted to meet me, wanted to know her grandmother, and Marcus got quiet, got tense, and said we had to wait for the right time, that I didn't know he'd found her, that it would be a shock, that he needed to prepare me, and Lily said she understood, she could wait, she was just so happy to have found him. But then, Caroline came back into the picture. This is what Lily told me next. Sitting on that bedroom floor with fever-bright eyes, Caroline, who supposedly didn't live there anymore, but had a key, and would let herself in at odd hours. And one day, about 6 weeks ago, Caroline came in and found Lily there, found her sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast with Marcus. And Caroline's face had gone white, then red, and she'd started screaming, demanding to know who this girl was, what she was doing in Marcus's house, and Marcus had frozen, couldn't speak, and finally Lily had said, "I'm his daughter." And Caroline had laughed, a harsh, terrible sound, and said, "He doesn't have a daughter. We couldn't have children. That's why I left him. He's defective. And Marcus had finally found his voice and told Caroline the truth. About Amanda, about the baby they gave up, about how Lily had found him, and he couldn't turn her away. Lily said Caroline had gotten very quiet then, very still, and asked how long Lily was planning to stay. And Lily had said she wasn't sure, maybe a few weeks, maybe longer. She was thinking about transferring to ASU, being closer to Marcus, getting to know her father, and Caroline's expression had changed, had become calculating, and she'd said, "Well, isn't this interesting?" and left without another word. After that, Lily said, things got weird. Caroline started coming around more often, being friendly to Lily. Too friendly, offering to take her shopping, to show her around Phoenix, to help her enroll in school, and Marcus had seemed relieved, seemed to think Caroline was accepting the situation. But Lily felt uncomfortable, felt like there was something false about Caroline's sudden warmth, something performative. Then Lily started getting sick. Just small things at first, headaches, nausea, dizziness. But it got progressively worse over the next 3 weeks. She couldn't keep food down, her joints ached, she was exhausted all the time. And Marcus took her to a walk-in clinic where they ran some tests and said it was probably a virus, it would pass, drink plenty of fluids and rest. And Lily tried to do that, but she only got worse. And Marcus got more and more worried, and Caroline kept bringing her special smoothies, saying they would help settle her stomach, help her feel better. And Lily drank them because she was desperate to feel normal again, to not be a burden on Marcus, who was already doing so much for her. "When did you realize the smoothies were making you worse?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, because I could see where this was going, could see the shape of it forming like a dark cloud. And Lily looked at me with those ancient eyes and said, 2 weeks ago, I woke up in the middle of the night, violently ill, throwing up so hard I thought I was going to die. And I knocked the glass on the bedside table over, the one Caroline had brought me earlier. And when I was cleaning it up the next morning, I saw there was residue in the bottom, white powder that hadn't dissolved all the way, and I took a picture of it with my phone because something in my gut told me to document it. And then I started pretending to drink the smoothies but pouring them down the sink when Caroline wasn't looking. And over the next few days, I started feeling a tiny bit better. Not much, but enough to notice. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and fierce, because if what Lily was saying was true, if Caroline had been poisoning her, poisoning this sick teenager who'd already been through so much, then I didn't know what I was capable of, what I might do. "Did you tell Marcus?" I asked, and Lily nodded, tears spilling over again, and said, "I told him last week, showed him the picture, told him I thought Caroline was putting something in my drinks, and he didn't want to believe it. He kept saying Caroline wouldn't do that. She was a healthcare professional. She'd taken an oath." But I could see doubt in his eyes. Could see him starting to question things. And that night, after I went to bed, I heard them fighting in the living room. Heard Caroline screaming at him. Heard him yelling back. Something about money and insurance and inheritance. And the next morning, he told me we were going to the hospital. He was taking me to get a full workup, blood tests, everything. We were going to find out what was wrong with me and fix it, and I was so relieved. But then Caroline showed up as we were leaving, let herself in with her key, and there was another fight, and Marcus told me to go wait in the bedroom, to hide under the bed if I heard anyone coming because he needed to handle this alone. And I did what he said because I was scared and sick, and I trusted him. And I heard them arguing for a long time, heard things breaking, heard Caroline say something about how I was going to ruin her plans, how she'd worked too hard to let some bastard child from Marcus's past destroy everything. And then it got quiet, too quiet, and I heard the front door slam, and I waited for Marcus to come get me, but he never did. And when I finally came out hours later, the house was empty. Marcus's car was gone. His phone was on the kitchen counter, smashed to pieces, and there was blood on the living room wall. Not a lot, but some. Like someone had been shoved into the corner of the bookshelf. I listened to all of this with my heart in my throat, my mind racing through possibilities, because this wasn't just about a secret daughter anymore. This was about something much darker, much more dangerous, and my son was missing, had been missing for 3 days. And his ex-wife, who maybe wasn't really his ex-wife, was involved somehow. And this girl, my granddaughter, a word that felt foreign and right at the same time, was sick and scared and had been hiding under a bed for 72 hours, waiting for her father to come back. "Why didn't you call the police?" I asked, and Lily looked down at her hands and said in a small voice, "Because Marcus made me promise I wouldn't. Made me swear that if anything ever happened, I would stay hidden and wait for him. That going to the police would make everything worse. That Caroline's family has connections. That I needed to trust him. And I didn't know what else to do. I don't have anyone else. And I was afraid if I left the house, Caroline would know, would do something, would hurt Marcus worse. And I kept thinking he'd come back. He'd walk through that door any minute, but he didn't. And I ran out of food 2 days ago, and I've just been drinking water and trying to stay quiet and waiting." I pulled her into my arms then. This girl I'd never met, who was my flesh and blood, my granddaughter who carried my mother's face and my son's eyes, and I held her while she sobbed, and I made a decision. The kind of decision that changes everything, the kind you can't take back, and I said, "We're calling the police right now, and we're getting you to a hospital, and we're finding Marcus. And if Caroline has done something to my son, I will make sure she pays for it. I don't care who her family is or what connections they have, she will not get away with this." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, and my hands weren't shaking anymore, they were steady. Because I had purpose now. I had someone to protect, and I wasn't that scared woman who'd forced her son to give up his baby 28 years ago. I was someone different now. Someone harder. Someone who'd spent nearly 3 decades living with guilt and regret. And I'd be damned if I'd let history repeat itself. If I'd let another person I loved be hurt because I was too afraid, or too proud, or too concerned with what other people thought to do the right thing. The 911 operator answered, and I told her everything in a rush. My words tumbling over each other, about my missing son and my sick granddaughter, and my ex-daughter-in-law who might be involved, and she told me to stay calm, stay in the house. Officers were being dispatched and an ambulance was on the way, and I should make sure the front door was unlocked so they could get in. And I did what she said, holding Lily's hand the whole time, and we waited in that bedroom for what felt like hours, but was probably only 12 minutes. And then I heard sirens and voices and footsteps, and 2 police officers appeared in the doorway, a young Hispanic man and an older white woman with kind eyes, and right behind them were paramedics with a gurney. And everything became a blur of activity. People asking questions, taking Lily's vitals, starting an IV line because she was severely dehydrated, and I heard one of the paramedics say her blood pressure was dangerously low, and they needed to transport her immediately, and I climbed into the ambulance with her, holding her hand as we raced toward Banner Desert Medical Center with lights and sirens blazing. In the emergency room, they whisked Lily away behind curtains, and I had to stay in the waiting area, pacing back and forth on the industrial carpet, and the female police officer, Detective Sarah Martinez, sat me down and asked me to start from the beginning, tell her everything I knew, and I did. I told her about Marcus not answering his phone for 2 weeks, about coming to his house and finding Lily, about what Lily had said about Caroline and the poisoning and the fight, and Detective Martinez wrote everything down in a small notebook, her expression growing more serious with each detail. And when I finished, she said, "Mrs. Hernandez, I need to be honest with you. This is concerning on multiple levels. We're going to need to bring in detectives from missing persons and possibly from crimes against persons. And we're going to need to search your son's house thoroughly, with your permission." And I nodded and said, "Search whatever you need to search, tear the place apart if you have to. Just find my son." She patted my hand and said she'd make some calls. And then a doctor came out, a young Indian woman with tired eyes, Dr. Patel, according to her name tag, and she said, "Are you with the young woman who came in, Lily Reeves?" And I said, "Yes, I'm her grandmother." And Dr. Patel's eyebrows went up slightly, but she didn't comment, just asked me to come with her to a consultation room, a small windowless space with 2 chairs and a box of tissues on the table. And I felt my stomach drop because I knew whatever she was about to tell me was bad. You don't take people to rooms with tissues for good news. "Your granddaughter is very ill," Dr. Patel said, sitting across from me with her hands folded on the table. "Her lab work shows evidence of heavy metal poisoning, specifically thallium, which is consistent with what she told the paramedics about someone possibly putting something in her drinks. Thallium poisoning presents with the exact symptoms she's been experiencing: gastrointestinal distress, neuropathy, hair loss, and if left untreated, it can cause seizures, kidney failure, and death. We're starting chelation therapy immediately to try to bind the thallium and help her body eliminate it. But I have to tell you, she's going to need intensive treatment, possibly weeks in the hospital, and there may be long-term effects depending on how much she was exposed to and for how long. I sat there processing this information. This confirmation that Caroline had indeed been poisoning Lily, had been slowly killing her, and I thought about thallium, about how it used to be in rat poison, about how you'd have to have access to it, have knowledge about it. And then I remembered Caroline was a dental hygienist, had access to all sorts of chemicals and materials, would know about toxicology, would know exactly how much to use to make someone sick without killing them immediately. And the cold calculation of it made me want to vomit. The police need to know this, I said, standing up, and Dr. Patel nodded and said, I've already called them. We're required to report suspected poisoning. Detective Martinez is on her way up now. And we've preserved samples of your granddaughter's blood and urine for evidence. And I felt a small surge of satisfaction that Caroline's crime wasn't going to be hidden, wasn't going to be swept away. There was proof now. Scientific proof. And even if Marcus never came back, even if the worst had happened, Caroline would face justice for what she'd done to Lily. Detective Martinez arrived with a partner, Detective James Chen, a serious-looking Asian man in his 50s, and they asked if they could speak with Lily, and Dr. Patel said she was sedated now but stable, and they could have a few minutes, and we all went back to the ICU where Lily was hooked up to various machines, her face even paler against the white pillow, and she opened her eyes when we approached, and Detective Chen introduced himself and said very gently, Lily, I know you're not feeling well, but we need to ask you some questions about Caroline and about what happened to Marcus. Is that okay? And Lily nodded weakly, and for the next 20 minutes, she told them everything she'd told me, and they recorded it on a small device. And Detective Chen asked about the photo she'd taken of the powder residue, and Lily said her phone was back at Marcus's house, in the bedroom, under the bed where she'd been hiding it, and Detective Martinez made a note of that and said they'd retrieve it as evidence. Then Detective Chen asked the question I'd been afraid to ask, the question that had been hovering in my mind like a dark bird. Lily, when you heard Marcus and Caroline fighting that last night, did you hear anyone threaten anyone else? Did you hear anything that suggested violence might occur? And Lily closed her eyes, tears seeping out, and said, I heard Caroline say, if you try to turn me in, if you try to expose what I've done, I will make sure you never see daylight again. I will make sure you disappear, and everyone will think you just ran off, abandoned your responsibilities like you did with Amanda. And Marcus said, You're insane. I'm taking Lily to the hospital tomorrow, and I'm telling them everything, and then I'm going to the police, and you're going to prison. And Caroline laughed and said, You really think they'll believe you over me? My father is a judge, my brother is a prosecutor, you're nobody. You're just a pill pusher with a bastard kid. Who do you think they'll believe? And then I heard a crash and a thud, and Marcus made a sound like the air was knocked out of him, and then I didn't hear anything else from him, just Caroline's footsteps walking around, and drawers opening and closing, and then the front door, and then nothing. The room was silent except for the beeping of Lily's monitors, and I felt Detective Martinez's eyes on me, assessing my reaction, and I said in a voice that sounded remarkably calm, You need to arrest Caroline, right now. She's admitted to poisoning Lily. She's threatened Marcus. She's clearly involved in his disappearance. And Detective Chen nodded and said, We're working on it, Mrs. Hernandez. We've got units going to her last known address right now. But I need to prepare you for the possibility that this is now a potential homicide investigation. Depending on what we find at your son's house, and depending on whether we can locate him, we may be looking at worst-case scenarios. The words homicide investigation echoed in my head, bouncing around my skull, and I felt my knees go weak, felt the room tilt, and Detective Martinez grabbed my elbow and guided me to a chair, and I sat there with my head in my hands, thinking about Marcus as a baby, as a little boy, as a teenager, as a man, thinking about all the ways I'd failed him, forced him to give up Lily, pushed him toward a life that led him here, to violence and disappearance and possibly death. And I cried, deep wrenching sobs that came from a place I didn't know existed. And Lily reached out from her hospital bed with her thin hand and touched my arm and whispered, It's not your fault, Grandma. And that word, Grandma, spoken out loud for the first time, broke something open in me, and put something back together at the same time? The police searched Marcus's house for 6 hours, from evening into night, and they found Lily's phone under the bed just where she said it would be, with the photo of the powder residue clearly visible. And they found cleaning supplies in the garage, bottles of bleach and ammonia and other chemicals, and they found a false bottom in one of the kitchen drawers with a small vial hidden there. A vial that field tested positive for thallium sulfate. And they found Marcus's laptop hidden in the back of his closet, password protected but intact, and they took all of it as evidence, bagged and tagged and documented. They also found that spot of blood Lily had mentioned on the wall near the bookshelf in the living room, and they swabbed it and sent it for DNA analysis, rush order, because now this was officially a missing person case with suspected foul play. And I sat in the hospital cafeteria at midnight drinking terrible coffee and waiting for news, any news. And Detective Martinez came and sat across from me and said, "We haven't been able to locate Caroline yet. She's not at her apartment, not at her parents' house, not at her workplace. We've got a bolo out for her car, a silver 2019 Lexus, and we've flagged her credit cards and her phone, so the moment she uses anything we'll know. But right now, she's in the wind." And I felt frustration and fear warring in my chest. Because every hour that passed was an hour that Marcus could be hurt, could be dying, could be already dead. And Caroline was out there somewhere, free, possibly destroying evidence, or fleeing the state, or the country. I asked Detective Martinez what would happen next, and she explained that they were treating Marcus's house as a crime scene, that they had forensic teams going through every inch, that they were pulling phone records and financial records for both Marcus and Caroline, that they were interviewing neighbors and co-workers, and anyone who might have seen or heard something, that they were doing everything possible. But she also said, and I appreciated her honesty, that the first 72 hours in a missing person case were critical. And we were already past that window. And statistically, the chances of finding Marcus alive decreased with each passing day, and I nodded because I knew this. I'd watched enough news stories, enough true crime shows. I knew how these things usually ended, but I couldn't let myself believe it. Couldn't let myself imagine a world where Marcus was gone, where I'd never get to tell him I was sorry, where I'd never get to meet my granddaughter properly, get to know her, get to try to make up for the 28 years I'd stolen from both of them. I spent that night in a chair next to Lily's hospital bed, dozing fitfully, waking every time a nurse came in to check vitals or adjust medications. And in the early morning hours when the hospital was quiet and the sky outside was just beginning to lighten, Lily woke up and looked at me and said, "Tell me about my dad. Tell me about Marcus when he was young." And so I did. I told her stories I hadn't thought about in years, about how Marcus used to catch lizards in our apartment complex courtyard and keep them in a shoebox with holes punched in the top, about how he'd learned to cook because I was working such long hours and someone had to make dinner, about how he'd won a science fair in 8th grade with a project about water purification, about how he'd been so proud when he got accepted to ASU with a partial scholarship, about how he'd called me from campus his first week crying because he was homesick and I'd driven the 40 minutes to bring him his favorite meal, enchiladas verdes, and we'd eaten together in his dorm room and he'd felt better. And Lily listened with tears running down her face. And she told me about her life. About the foster homes, some good, some terrible, about a family she'd lived with for 3 years who she thought might adopt her, but then they got pregnant with their own baby, and suddenly there was no room for her anymore. About aging out of the system at 18 with $700 and a garbage bag full of belongings. About working her way through community college taking classes whenever she could afford them. About how she'd always felt like something was missing. Like there was a hole in her life shaped like a family. And how finding Marcus had felt like finally coming home. Like finally belonging somewhere. And now he was gone. And she was terrified she'd lose him before she ever really got to know him. And I took her hand and promised her, "We will find him, baby girl. We will bring him home, and you and I are family now. No matter what happens, you're not alone anymore. You have me, and I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it with every fiber of my being. This girl who was a stranger 3 days ago was now the most important person in my world besides Marcus, and I would move heaven and earth to protect her and find my son. The break in the case came 36 hours after I found Lily, came in the form of a phone call from Detective Chen at 6 in the morning, his voice tense with controlled excitement. Mrs. Hernandez, we've located Caroline's car. It was parked at a storage facility in Apache Junction, and we've got units on site now, preparing to breach the unit she has rented there. I wanted to give you a heads up before you see it on the news. And I said, Is Marcus there? Did you find him? And there was a pause. A terrible pause that lasted 3 heartbeats, and then Detective Chen said, We don't know yet. We're going in now. I'll call you as soon as we know anything. And he hung up, and I sat there holding my phone, staring at it like it might ring again and give me different news, better news. And Lily was looking at me with wide eyes, and I told her what Detective Chen had said. And we waited. We waited for 45 minutes, that felt like 45 years, and then my phone rang again, and I answered before the first ring finished. And Detective Chen's voice said, We found him. He's alive. He's injured, but he's alive. We're transporting him to Banner Desert now. Same hospital you're at, he should be there in 20 minutes. And I started crying and couldn't stop. And Lily was asking, What is it? Is he okay? And I managed to choke out, They found him. He's alive. He's coming here. And Lily burst into tears too. And we held each other and cried. And the nurse who came in to check on the commotion smiled and brought us tissues and said, Good news, I take it? And I nodded and said, The best news. Marcus arrived at the hospital in an ambulance, and they took him straight to the ER, and I wasn't allowed back there yet. I had to wait while they stabilized him and assessed his injuries, and Detective Martinez came to the hospital and found me in the waiting room and told me what they'd discovered. Caroline had rented a climate-controlled storage unit 3 months ago, in March, right around the time Lily had shown up, and she'd been using it to stockpile supplies, rope, duct tape, camping equipment, non-perishable food, and she'd also been using it to store documents, financial records, life insurance policies, and Detective Martinez said, It looks like she'd been planning something for a while. We're still piecing it together, but from what we can tell from the documents, Marcus had a life insurance policy worth $750,000, and the beneficiary was still listed as Caroline even after the divorce, and we found a copy of his will, also still listing Caroline as the primary beneficiary of his estate, which includes his house and his retirement accounts. We're talking over $1 million total. And the pieces started clicking into place. The fake divorce, the continued contact, Caroline's rage at Lily's appearance because Lily complicated everything, if Marcus acknowledged her as his daughter. If he changed his will to include her, Caroline's meal ticket disappeared. And so she'd decided to eliminate the threat. Eliminate Lily slowly with poison. Make it look like illness. And when Marcus figured out what she was doing and threatened to go to the police, she'd eliminated him too, or tried to. Thank God she'd failed. Detective Martinez continued. We found Marcus locked in the storage unit. He'd been there for 3 days. Hands and feet zip-tied, duct tape over his mouth, head injury from being hit with what we think was a ceramic lamp. The broken pieces were still at the scene at his house. He's dehydrated and hypothermic and pretty beaten up, but he's going to survive, and the moment he's able to give a statement, we'll have everything we need to charge Caroline with attempted murder, kidnapping, assault, and the poisoning of Lily. And I asked, Where is Caroline now? Did you arrest her? And Detective Martinez's expression darkened, and she said, Not yet. She wasn't at the storage facility. We're still looking for her, but her car was there, so she must have had another vehicle or someone picked her up. We've got a warrant out for her arrest, and every law enforcement agency in Arizona is looking for her. She won't get far. I was finally allowed to see Marcus 2 hours later, after they'd treated his injuries and moved him to a regular room. And when I walked in and saw him lying in that hospital bed with bruises on his face and bandages on his wrists where the zip ties had cut into his skin, I felt such a rush of emotion, relief and anger, and love and sorrow, all mixed together. And I went to his bedside and took his hand gently, careful not to hurt him, and I said, Marcus, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. And he opened his eyes, those eyes that were so like Lily's eyes, and he said in a hoarse voice, Mom, where's Lily? Is she okay? Did Caroline get to her? And I said, She's safe. She's here in this hospital. She's sick from what Caroline did to her, but she's going to be okay. The doctors are treating her. And Marcus closed his eyes, and tears leaked out, and he said, I should have protected her better. I should have seen what Caroline was doing sooner. I should have never let her near Lily. And I squeezed his hand and said, This is not your fault. Caroline is the one who did this. Caroline is the one who's responsible. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of my own responsibility. Because I was the one who'd made him give Lily up in the first place. I was the one who'd set this whole chain of events in motion 28 years ago. Marcus looked at me and said, "I need to see her. I need to see Lily. Can you take me to her?" And I said, "You need to rest. You've been through trauma." But he shook his head stubbornly, that same stubborn shake he'd had since he was a toddler, and said, "Mom, I've been locked in a storage unit for 3 days thinking I was going to die and never see my daughter again, never get to tell her I love her, never get to make up for lost time. I need to see her now." And I understood. I understood completely, and I went and found his nurse and explained the situation. And she was hesitant, but she saw the desperation in Marcus's eyes, and she said, "Okay, but we're doing this in a wheelchair. You're not walking anywhere." And she got a wheelchair and helped Marcus into it. And I pushed him down the hallway to the ICU where Lily was. And when we got to her room, she was awake, sitting up slightly. And when she saw Marcus, her face transformed, lit up with joy and relief. And she said, "Dad." And Marcus said, "Baby girl." And I wheeled him to her bedside, and they reached for each other. And I stepped back to give them privacy, to give them this moment they both needed. And I watched through the window as they held hands and talked, both of them crying, both of them smiling through the tears. And I felt something shift in my chest. Some of the guilt I'd carried for 28 years lifting just slightly, not gone, but lighter. Because yes, I'd made a terrible mistake. Yes, I'd separated them when they should have been together. But they'd found each other anyway. They'd fought their way back to each other, and I hadn't been able to prevent that. And maybe there was hope for redemption after all. Caroline was arrested 2 days later at the Tucson airport trying to board a flight to Mexico City using a fake passport, and Detective Martinez called to tell me personally, said that Caroline had fought the arresting officers, had screamed that they were making a mistake, that Marcus was a liar, that Lily was a con artist trying to steal her money, but none of it mattered because they had evidence. Mountains of evidence. The thallium in the vial. Lily's medical records showing poisoning, the storage unit with Marcus's blood on the floor, the financial documents showing motive, and Caroline's own Google search history on her laptop, which included searches for how much thallium to cause illness, how to make someone disappear, countries without extradition, and dozens of other damning queries. The prosecutor assigned to the case, a sharp woman named Lisa Fernandez, came to meet with me and Marcus and Lily at the hospital, and she laid out what the charges would be: attempted murder of Lily, attempted murder of Marcus, kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud. And she said with confidence, "We're going to put her away for the rest of her life. She's not going to see the outside of a prison cell again." And I felt satisfaction at that, fierce and hot, because Caroline had tried to destroy my family, had tried to kill my son and my granddaughter, and she deserved everything she was going to get. The preliminary hearing was 3 weeks later, and by then both Marcus and Lily were out of the hospital. Lily was staying with me at my apartment, sleeping in the guest room that I'd hastily converted from storage space, and Marcus was at his house but came over every day, and we were learning to be a family, awkward and tentative, but trying. And I was learning about Lily, learning that she loved to draw, was actually incredibly talented, that she wanted to study art therapy, wanted to help kids who'd been through trauma like she had. And I was learning to be a grandmother, which was different from being a mother, less about authority and more about support. And I was learning to forgive myself, slowly, for the choices I'd made 28 years ago. Because Lily had told me, "I'm not going to lie and say I'm glad I grew up in foster care. I'm not, but I also don't want to spend the rest of my life angry about it, angry at you, or Marcus, or my mom. I just want to move forward. I want to build something new." And her grace humbled me. At the preliminary hearing, Caroline showed up in an orange jumpsuit, her hair lank, her face hard, and she stared at Marcus with such hatred that I felt chilled. And when it was time for victim statements, Marcus went first, and he stood at the podium and spoke clearly and calmly about what Caroline had done, about how she'd pretended to accept Lily, had befriended her while poisoning her, about how she'd hit him with a lamp and left him to die in a storage unit. And Caroline's lawyer objected multiple times, but the judge overruled him, and then it was Lily's turn. And I'd offered to go with her, But she'd wanted to do it alone, and she stood there. This brave, beautiful girl. And she said, "You tried to kill me because you saw me as a threat to your money, to your comfort. You didn't see me as a person, as someone who'd spent her whole life just wanting a family, just wanting to belong somewhere. You saw me as an obstacle, and you tried to remove me like I was nothing. But I'm not nothing. I'm Marcus's daughter. I'm Patricia's granddaughter. I'm a survivor. And I'm here to make sure you face consequences for what you've done." And her voice didn't waver once, and I'd never been more proud of anyone in my life. The trial was 4 months later, in October, and it lasted 2 weeks, and I was there every single day, sitting in the gallery with Lily on one side and Marcus on the other. And we listened to the prosecution lay out their case piece by piece, the evidence of the thallium poisoning, the storage unit, the financial motive, the search history, the testimony from neighbors who'd heard arguing, the testimony from Marcus's co-workers who said Caroline had called looking for him multiple times in the weeks before his disappearance, asking strange questions about his schedule and his whereabouts. And the defense tried to paint Marcus as an unreliable witness, tried to suggest Lily was a con artist who'd manufactured the whole thing. But it fell flat because the physical evidence was undeniable, science didn't lie, and the jury saw through the defense's desperation. Caroline herself took the stand, against her lawyer's advice according to the court reporter who I'd befriended, and she was a terrible witness. Cold and calculating, and when the prosecutor asked her why she'd searched for how much thallium to cause illness on her laptop, she claimed she'd been researching for a crime novel she was writing, and when asked why she'd never mentioned this novel to anyone before, why there were no files related to it on her computer, she stammered and couldn't answer. And when asked why Marcus's blood was in her storage unit, she claimed he must have planted it there to frame her, and the prosecutor said, "So, your ex-husband injured himself, collected his own blood, broke into your storage unit, planted the blood, and then locked himself inside and threw away the key, all to frame you?" And Caroline said, "Yes, he's obsessed with me. He can't let me go." And several jury members actually laughed. It was that absurd. The verdict came back after only 6 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts, and when the forewoman read the word guilty for the first time, I felt Lily grab my hand, and when she read it for the second count, Marcus grabbed my other hand, and by the time she'd read it for all 7 counts, we were all crying, and Caroline sat stone-faced at the defense table, showing no emotion, and the judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. And at the sentencing hearing, the judge, a stern-faced man in his 60s, looked at Caroline and said, "You are a healthcare professional who used your knowledge to slowly poison a vulnerable teenager. You are a former spouse who tried to murder your ex-husband for financial gain. You have shown no remorse, no accountability, and no recognition of the harm you've caused. And while I cannot give you the maximum sentence on all counts to run consecutively, I can and will give you the maximum on each count to run as consecutively as the law allows." And he sentenced her to 25 years for the attempted murder of Lily, 25 years for the attempted murder of Marcus, 15 years for kidnapping, and 5 years for assault, with the sentences to run consecutively, for a total of 70 years, which at Caroline's age of 43 meant she would die in prison. And when he brought down the gavel, I felt a sense of closure I didn't know I'd been waiting for. Felt the final piece of this nightmare click into place. Life after the trial was strange, was about rebuilding and healing and learning to move forward. Lily enrolled at ASU in the spring semester in their art therapy program, and she moved into an apartment near campus that Marcus and I helped her furnish, our first project as a family, arguing good-naturedly about whether she needed a desk or a drafting table, about what color to paint the walls, about whether the couch we found at the thrift store was charming or just old and settling on charming. Marcus sold his house, said he couldn't live there anymore with all the memories of what had happened, and he bought a smaller place closer to me, and we had Sunday dinners now, real ones, where we cooked together and talked and laughed and sometimes cried, working through the past, working toward the future. I retired from my job as a nurse's aide, decided at 64 I'd worked enough, and I started volunteering at a youth center, working with kids in foster care, trying in some small way to make up for what Lily had gone through, to help other kids who were in the system, who felt unwanted and alone. And Lily sometimes came with me, and watching her interact with these kids, seeing how she connected with them, how she understood their pain in a way I never could, I felt hope for the future. Felt like maybe something good could come from all the bad. Marcus went to therapy. We all did, actually, individually and together. Working through the trauma of what Caroline had done. Working through the older trauma of the adoption and the years of separation. And it was hard. There were sessions where we all cried, where we said things that hurt, where we had to confront ugly truths about ourselves and each other. But we kept going, kept showing up, kept trying, because that's what family does. Real family. Not the idealized version I'd had in my head 28 years ago when I thought I was doing the right thing, but the messy, complicated, real version where you hurt each other and forgive each other and keep choosing each other anyway. On Lily's 19th birthday, about a year after I first found her under Marcus's bed, we had a party at my apartment, just the three of us, and I made her a cake, lopsided and imperfect, but made with love. And Marcus gave her a necklace that had belonged to his grandmother, my mother, a delicate silver chain with a small turquoise pendant, and I gave her a photo album I'd been working on for months, filled with pictures of Marcus as a baby, as a child, as a teenager. Pictures of me and my parents and my grandparents, her great-grandparents, all the family history she'd missed out on, all the people she'd never gotten to meet, and on the last page, I'd written a letter to her, an apology and a promise, apologizing for the years she'd spent alone, for the family she'd been denied, for my part in that denial, and promising to spend the rest of my life making it up to her, being the grandmother she deserved. And when she read it, she cried, and I cried, and Marcus cried, and we held each other, and we were a family, broken and scarred but together. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Sitting here now, 2 years after that day, I found Lily under the bed. 2 years after my world turned upside down and inside out, I think about how close I came to losing everything. How if I'd waited one more day to check on Marcus, if I'd convinced myself his silence was fine, if I'd been too afraid or too proud to call the police, Lily would be dead. Marcus would be dead. And Caroline would have gotten away with it, would have collected the insurance money and lived her life in comfort while my family was destroyed. I think about the choices I made 28 years ago, choices I thought were right, choices I thought would give everyone a better life, and how those choices led us here, in a roundabout, painful way, to this moment where I have a granddaughter I love fiercely, where I have a relationship with my son that's honest and real in a way it never was before, where I've learned that protecting the people you love doesn't mean making decisions for them, doesn't mean controlling their lives, means standing beside them, supporting them, being there when they fall. I think about Caroline rotting in prison, about how greed and selfishness and the inability to see other people as fully human led her to throw away her entire life, and I feel pity for her. Not much, but some, because what a waste, what a terrible waste of a life. And I think about Amanda, Lily's mother, who died alone of an overdose, who never got to see her daughter grow up, who made mistakes and paid for them with her life. And I wish I could go back and tell my 28-year-old self to have compassion, to see Amanda as a scared girl instead of a threat, to help instead of judge. But I can't go back. I can only go forward, can only try to do better now with the time I have left. If you're watching this video, if you've stayed with me through this whole story, I want to ask you something. What would you do if you discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about your family? Would you have the courage to face it, to deal with the consequences, to do the right thing even when the right thing is terrifying? I didn't have that courage 28 years ago. I let fear guide my decisions, fear of poverty, fear of judgment, fear of the future, and it cost my son and my granddaughter 28 years they should have had together. But I'd like to think I have that courage now, that when I found Lily and learned what Caroline had done, I made the right choice. I protected her. I fought for her. I chose love over fear. Leave me a comment and tell me what you would do. Tell me about your own family secrets, your own moments of courage or regret. Tell me where you're watching from and what this story means to you, because we all carry these stories, these wounds, these chances at redemption, and sharing them, being witnessed in them, that's how we heal. That's how we move forward. Hit that like button if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you to call your own family members and tell them you love them. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of survival and justice and complicated family love and click on one of the videos on your screen right now. I promise they'll surprise you. They'll make you feel. They'll remind you that life is messy and hard and beautiful and worth fighting for. God bless you all, wherever you are, whatever you're going through. May you have the courage to face your truths, the strength to protect the vulnerable, the wisdom to learn from your mistakes, and the grace to forgive yourself and others, because we're all just doing the best we can with what we know. And sometimes, the best we can do is show up, tell the truth, and love fiercely in the face of everything that tries to tear us apart. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for witnessing my story, and Lily's story, and Marcus's story. We are not alone in this. None of us are. And that's the whole point. That's what family means. That's what love means. We keep showing up for each other. We keep trying. We keep hoping. We keep building something beautiful out of the broken pieces. And that's enough. That's everything. That's all we can do, and it's more than enough.